with SK Telecom winning Worlds and that granting Faker and Bengi their third World Championships in 4 years, and obviously the only people to ever win 3 world titles and 2 of them back to back. The fact that they've played together the whole time and won those. Now, obviously, the first thing you do when you hear that stat is you talk about Faker. I mean, he's the star player of the team. He's the primary carry. So people affirmed that, Faker is the greatest player of all time in League of Legends. Now people even start to contrast him against the great figures of other games, Flash, Cooler, whoever you might be talking about, from depending on which game, Neo from CS. And another thing that I found interesting is that's the initial place everyone goes. That's where I go initially. And then you've got the storyline and them winning it together. So then there's this storyline that I noticed. It's a narrative that's being pushed quite hard, and people like to bring it up, almost thinking it's kind of like a counter to Faker's greatness, which is they want to push the angle that but Bengi's won 3 world titles too. Every time Faker won a world title, Bengi was there as well. So really, it's not Faker winning 3. That's not the big detail, the headline alone. You got to make the headline Faker and Bengi win. And it feels like people are irritated by how much focus gets put on Faker. So their way of countering it, rather than go Faker did all that, but also Bengi was there and he played like a role in it, which would be a reasonable way to say it. They try to almost push it to the other way and be like, but they both won them. So, I mean, they're both kind of the most winning players ever. They're both ones who won them and that. And they almost angled the storyline a bit too far the other way, as though because they're annoyed that Faker got too much focus, they want to make it but you can only talk about them as a package. You can't separate Faker out. And they try to draw some kind of weird equivalency between the two players because they both won the titles. Now, the big issue I have with this, especially as someone who obviously history in esports context has been my interest almost the entire time I've been involved, and particularly the contextual component of history, where by learning about history and the circumstances by which things came to be, we actually understand the value of certain things and their relation and dynamic with each other. And that's a key detail to understand. It's not enough just to put a number and say that means, whatever the number could imply. We've got to find out why it means that. So one of the things about Bengi to acknowledge is, obviously, that's an incredible accomplishment for Bengi to win 3 world titles. And Bengi is clearly a massive overachiever in his career. You look at him when he comes into League of Legends, you look at him each year of League of Legends, and if you just looked at his play, and I didn't tell you what the accomplishments were, you would think there's no way this guy could win 3 world titles. There's no way he would win all those LCK titles, etc. He's an overachiever in that sense. The difference is, Faker's an overachiever too, actually, believe it or not. Because you know what? You could be the best player of all time. You could be as good as Faker is, and you could not win 3 worlds. You might win 1 world. Hell, it's actually possible if you look at the history of team sports and team esports games. You might win 0 worlds. You might even win the odd LCK or something, everything that fits you and suits you. There's no saying that Faker, even with all his talent and his great play, was supposed to win 3 worlds. And this is par for the course. No, he's over it. He's exceeded expectations. The difference is, he has exceeded them in a different way. He did everything on his part that he could do, and then he got everything else as well. Because for someone like Faker in a team game, and particularly a Korean team esport, I mean, it wasn't just his play that won him all those worlds. He needed good teammates every year. You notice that each of his titles come with a swap in teammates. Sure, the last 2 you only swapped 1 player on paper, right? Because you only swapped out Duke. But no, you got Blank as well. So technically in different times you swapped out 2 players. Obviously the Season 3 championship, you swapped out 3 players from that. So I think Faker's won history worlds with something like 11 different teammates. So he needed someone to get him those teammates and to coach them. So he needed good teammates every year to update and be able to play the meta and have the form to go with him to the World Championships and win. He needed a good coach at all these different times to work with the different players and work with him and work in the new meta. He needed a good owner to even be able to secure those players and to have the funds and to keep SK Telecom wealthy enough in terms of the org that they actually are able to get these players and draw them in. So Faker winning is more significant. But even with Faker winning, there are obviously contextual details that it's not like he just 1v9'd for 4 years and won 3 world titles. But he's in the primary carry role. He is the star name. He is the one true defining factor between all 3 worlds. I mean, we all know, for example, that actually Bengi didn't play that many games in this Worlds compared to, for example, Faker throughout all the other Worlds. So he had the carry role. And here's the other problem with making it the Faker-Bengi package, is that we know Faker can win championships without Bengi. Sure, he hasn't won a Worlds without Bengi, although actually you could make the case, since Blank played many of the games, that that's actually debatable at this point in time. But he obviously can't win a Worlds without Bengi completely. That hasn't happened. But he's certainly come close to doing it this time, because Bengi didn't play most of the games. But we know he's won big tournaments without Bengi. This year, he won the IM World Championship, LCK Spring, and MSI, 3 international tournaments, one with all the best teams from each of the regions represented. He won all 3 of those international titles without Bengi playing a single playoff game. Blank played all those playoff games, and so this is another factor where you can't go too hard the other way on the Bengi one. You can, but Faker can't win without Bengi. Now, that's ridiculous. We've seen that he can. It's the case that not only was Bengi not used in those tournaments in the big games, but in LCK Summer, okay, they didn't win this one. They lost 3-2 to Katie Rolst, obviously. Bengi didn't play any playoff games there. So 4 tournaments this year, Bengi didn't get a single playoff game. Now at Worlds, Bengi played in 8 of the 14 playoff games. He got a good run here, and obviously, the coaches used him every time they thought Blank was failing until this time, where in the final they just started Bengi outright because they'd seen this like trend that was happening with Blank. So they're like, right, we're going to bring Bengi in for the final. We're going to start with Bengi, although they still went back to Blank for game 4 quite inexplicably, The interesting thing is, though, you look over the year at the stats, and Bengi's actually played very few games compared to Blank. Blank has played in 93 competitive games in 2016. Bengi has only played 37. So, he's not even close to half of what Blank has played over the year. Now, Blank's record in games in 2016 is he's won 64 and lost 29. So his winning percentage is actually 68.82%. Bengi played in 37 games and won 24 of them. So his winning percentage is actually lower in SK Telecom than Blank's. He's only won 64.86%. Now, obviously, that's all the games against all the opponents. Now, sure, the winning percentage is higher for Blank. They've played Blank more. The coaches clearly have chosen Blank as the better jungler for this year and for this SK Telecom. But what's the reason why Bengi does get into games? What's the reason why they do use him? Because obviously they don't want him most of the time. The key thing to Bengi that makes him really good is he's the insurance policy. Blank is still, to some degree, kind of a rookie. He's a guy who hasn't played at this level and who sometimes in big games does have his issues. He's a better player at the moment than Bengi, but he has his issues in terms of the meta, or not really the meta in that sense, but in terms of if he gets pushed on a champion he's not comfortable on, he clearly has issues. And then there's also the fact that in certain big high pressure games, he has had his issues and looked like he's shit the bed or he's been ineffective. So they haven't used Bengi as though Bengi's a better player, but here's the thing. They have used him as kind of like the closer or the insurance policy or the backup or the player where if Blank shits the bed, if he starts to tilt, now's when we bring in Bengi. Because Bengi's had an inconsistent champion pool all year. He hasn't had strengths, that's why he hasn't been in the lineup. So instead, they wait till Blank looks like he's tilting or he's not fitting the game, he's not doing anything for them, and they bring in Bengi at that point in time. He's the closer, he's been the clutch guy, he's known how to play around his team. He's even got wins on champions that weren't particularly super famous for him. I mean, obviously his Lee Sin hasn't been used that much historically. The Nidalee game's obviously a ridiculous one where he wasn't even supposed to play that, but he played it anyway. He's not amazing at his champions, but he's been able to get the most out of them. He's been able to make them work in the game to his best capabilities and get wins. So he's been clutch in that sense. And obviously that's been very key for SKT to win some of these championships. And you got to add in, he's a veteran teammate of Faker's who knows how to play around Faker and what Faker wants in the game. So as a result, if you want to go with, we've got the greatest player of all time, and there's only one other player who was with him for all his championships, and he's kind of like the sidekick, then the analogy people want to go for, the sports analogy people want to reach for, right, is Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Because these are players where Michael Jordan's, to some degree, the undisputed. He's not really. There are actually some great players who from the 70s and 60s who think Wilt Chamberlain's better or whatever, or whoever it might be. Michael Jordan is considered the greatest player of all time. And he won 6 championships, and the only teammate he had for all 6 championships was Scottie Pippen, the second best player on the Bulls. So that's an obvious one where people want to put the two together and then say it's Faker and Bengi like that. I mean, another example you could pick, by the way, could be like Wayne Gretzky, the best hockey player of all time, and Mark Messier, his sidekick for his titles that he won. But the problem is, these analogies don't really work, not because of the great player, the Wayne Gretzky, the Michael Jordan. Yeah, we can acknowledge Faker's the greatest, and that part fits. It's the sidekick part that doesn't quite work, because the problem is, Michael Jordan shows the best, but Scottie Pippen is too good relative to his relationship to the Michael Jordan figure, and relative to how good he is at the game compared to Bengi. That's where the analogy falls down. And so, because, for example, Scottie Pippen, one of the best defensive players of all time, could guard almost every position, MVP candidate in the year that Michael Jordan left, 1994, and he was carrying the Bulls to 54 wins, whatever it was. A better analogy, as a result, would actually be Kobe Bryant for Faker and Derek Fisher for Bengi. And obviously we're going to primarily focus on the Derek Fisher aspect. Sure, Kobe Bryant isn't the greatest player of all time, but he's one of the best players of all time, and he was the dominant carry of the latter-day championships that we're in, and one of the best players on the team. And so it's the Derek Fisher part that I want to emphasize here. Because Kobe and Derek Fisher won 5 championships together. They were also the only 2 teammates who were together for all 5 of those championships. So that part's shared with the Faker Bengi part. But the key part is, Derek Fisher was never the second best player on the Lakers. He wasn't even close to it. On the first one, he was a pretty good role player. He was well above average at that point in time. Shooting was very good from three-point. When he came back for the 2009-2010 championships, they made the 3 finals in a row from 2008 to 2010. He was the role player. And the whole point there is, as a role player, he had a lot of value. But not necessarily his skill anymore. He was still a good shooter, but he had to get his spots to do that. He wasn't very good at getting a shot off the dribble. This is a guy where the key detail to him later was his relationship with Kobe Bryant, and then that he could add value as on kind of a lesser scale within the team. And so he was someone who was a good role player, someone who understood the teammates that he was playing with and the star player and could fit around him. He wasn't a sick individual player, but he was an above average one due to one facet that he was good at, and he was clutch. That's another key detail. Derek Fisher was very clutch. You remember, especially the 2009 final, he hit those clutch threes. I think it might have been, was it game 4? I think it was game 4. Might have been game 3, actually. And then there was obviously, I think it was game 3 against the Celtics that he had like a really sick game that went off and just had like a really clutch performance. So I think that's a better analogy for Bengi myself, because Bengi has accomplished great things. At one point in time, Bengi was one of the best junglers in the world, perhaps even the best in 2013. You can make the case, certainly he has his criteria. But the years beyond that, he's had his troubles. He wouldn't probably even have a chance to win Worlds now if there wasn't the chance to bring in a Tom or a Blank and to try these guys out and find guys that they think that the meta suits at the time and look for someone replaceable. And now put Bengi as someone's sub, as someone's guy where he comes in to relieve that guy. So using Bengi in that way is brilliant. But if you played Bengi in every game, odds are SK Telecom wouldn't have these accomplishments this year. They probably wouldn't have won a Worlds because they wouldn't have got to a Worlds, you could make the case. So I think it's not that you want to say Bengi's shit. He's not. He's accomplished great things. What a great overachiever. What a fantastic story, by the way, for kids. This is a guy who wasn't the best and who worked at it and found a way to work with other people and facilitate their greatness, and as a result got a share of the credit for himself. That's a great story for kids, whereas it's hard to actually say, be like Faker. You can't. The guy's a fucking prodigy, isn't he? And he just doesn't even seem like a human. He seems like a fucking alien when you talk to him and find out his mindset towards being good and practicing. He's like a robot, a computer, you know. So Bengi's the much more human, relatable character. But don't go the other way and peddle some like ridiculous forced false narrative that they were like Batman and Robin and he was like the sidekick and like the second best in the team and they were both as good and Faker couldn't have won without Bengi. Yeah, that's just a bit lame, you know. And unfortunately, this isn't a movie. You're not writing your own script. It's reality. So you've got to be reasonable to these people. You can have your own opinion, but you've got to be able to back it up. You can't just cut out all the details you want and peddle some false narrative. So I think Derek Fisher had a great career, overachieved, won 5 titles, played with a great player, did great things himself, had very special moments where he was a closer, doesn't make him the second best player, doesn't ever make him the MVP of a fucking playoff run either. And so that's a more reasonable analogy. Bengi is Derek Fisher.